Om Badram Karanebihi Shrunyama Devaha Badram Pashyema Akshabihi Ryajatraha Sthirairangair Tushtuvam Sastanubihi Vishema Devahitayadayuhu Swastinah Indro Vridrashravaha Swastinah Pusha Vishwavedaha Swastinah Tarksho Arishtanemihi Swastino Bruhaspatir Dadatu Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi यो अन्तः प्रविश्य मम वाच इमां प्रक्षुप्तां सञ्जीवयति अखिलशक्तिधरस्वधाम्नां अन्यांष्टहस्तचरणश्रवणत्वगादीन् प्राणान् नमो भगवते पुरुषाय तुभ्यं लसतु श्रीमदानन्दतीर्थेन्दुर्नो हृदम्बरे यद्वचश्चन्द्रिका स्वान्तसन्तापं विनिकृन्तति पदवाक्यप्रमाणज्ञान प्रणम्य शिरसा गुरून् व्याकरिष्ये यथाभूतं विष्णुतत्त्वविनिर्णयम्. So good morning, good afternoon and good evening to friends joining from various parts for our second round, first session of Gita Chinthana. Over to Suresh ji.
Thanks, Madhu. मनोजवं मारुततुल्यवेगं जितेन्द्रियं बुद्धिमतां वरिष्ठं वातात्मजं वानरयूतमुख्यं श्रीरामदूतं शिरसा नमामि। न माधवः समो देवो न च मध्वः समो गुरुः न तद्वाक्यं समं शास्त्रं न च तस्य समः पुमान्। Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and as Madhuji just said, welcome to the second iteration of Gita in the Sahiti Forum. We had shared some thought in one of the Sahiti sessions with regards to structuring the second iteration of Gita. So every last Sunday of the month, we will be having the Gita Chinthana. So we're starting off today, and today's session is focusing on introduction and the background. If we move to the next slide, what we have today are basically three topics. We will look at the historical perspective, just to set the context around it, which Susruji will take us through. Then Madhuji will talk, educate us about the greatness of Mahabharata and the Gita. And we will end today's session with just a brief overview about the overall content of Gita, wherein I will share a few thoughts. And towards the end of it, we will talk a little bit about structuring of the session moving forwards with chapter 1. So that's how today's session has been structured, and we'll straight away dive into today's discussion with Shushruji telling us about the historical perspective. Over to Shushruji, please.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Chaiva Tato Jayam Udire. So I don't really need to tell you a lot about Mahabharata because everyone is very familiar with this epic. It is been ingrained in our minds since childhood. We have been hearing stories, but I'll just put a few points through to put it into perspective. So just back to one slide, please. Just a quick quiz to start off. So first of all, who is the author of Mahabharata? Anyone, please?
Veda Vyasa.
Oh, thank you. So here is a very nice picture of Veda Vyasa. I thank Pratibha ji for sending this picture, and we have the three avatars of Vayu, Hanuma, Bhima, and Madhva worshipping Veda Vyasa. So very nice picture. Thank you, Pratibha ji. Next slide, please. So this week we celebrated Ganesh Chaturthi. So I want someone to tell us what is the link of Ganesha to Mahabharata?
Ganesha was the scribe for the Mahabharata.
Excellent, thank you. So yes, so Veda Vyasa ji dictated the Mahabharata, and Ganesh ji was the scribe. Perfect answer. Next slide, please. Okay, so as we all know, Mahabharata is an ancient Sanskrit epic poem, and it is set in northern India uh, in the kingdom of Kurus. So Kuru is based on the Bharata Vansha, and it is based on a real war that took place, as we know, between the Kauravas and the Pandavas. It is regarded as itihasa, a historical account, but also there is deep philosophy with code of ethics for the Sanatan Dharma. Next slide, please. So why is it called Mahabharata? So it is Mahat Tattvat Bharatvat Mahabharatam. So Mahat means, as we know from Madhuji's lecture, something that is big or very important. Bharam means it is very deep and heavy philosophy. So deep philosophy, very important philosophy. So it is called Mahabharatam. Madhuji will elaborate further, but the amount of philosophical knowledge there is in the Mahabharata it has been compared to the Vedas. So it is also called the Panchamo Veda in our Puranas. Next slide, please. Often there is a sort of tussle between the believers and the non-believers about whether Mahabharata is in fact or fiction. So I've just put a few points together. So whether it is fact or fiction. So the people who say it is fiction say, how is it possible that 4 million people fought in this war and only 18 people survived? This just sounds absurd. There is some arguments about astronomical calculations, and I will leave you to do some Google searches. There are experts who will put certain dates and others who will say, no, these astronomical calculations are incorrect, so the date is a different one. Some people say that we have done excavations around Dwarka, and the carbon dating does not match that of Dwapar Yuga. So there are people who still are non-believers, but the facts are there in Mahabharata itself. So the description is extremely elaborate. They mention 50 lineage of kings right down, and their dynasties right down from Swayambhu Manu. So right from the beginning of this Manvantara, right down to 50th lineage, they have put it down in Mahabharata. So it sort of makes sense that it is probably true. And it does say that it is itihasa. It isn't fiction, it is history. So there was as we know, after Krishna died, Dwarka got submerged in the sea, and certainly Indian excavators have found a submerged city of Dwarka, and that gives credence to this being fact. Of course, we don't have any other historical or archaeological evidence because of the time that has passed. The story does link up the other epic from Hinduism, which is Ramayana, and the correlation is fairly accurate. So again, you could say that both are fiction, but it is unlikely that there will be such accurate correlation. And there have been a lot of astronomical references throughout the Mahabharata. So whenever there is an event happening, Veda Ji has put the position of the stars, and using software data, planetarial data, two separate people have come up with a specific date of 16th October 5561 BCE. Now that does again give a lot of credence to it being fact rather than fiction. I will leave it to the audience to make their own minds up. For me, I know on which side of the argument I stand. Next one, please. So recently, I was very fortunate to visit a place of pilgrimage in northern India, where we found these three places of interest for tourism, or you can call them places of pilgrimage. So they are Vyasa Gufa, Ganesh Gufa, and Bhim Pul. So I'm sure quite a few of you have visited these places. So can anyone say where these are from?
Badri.
Absolutely. So there is a little village called Mana village just north of Badri, very close to the China border. And these places of pilgrimage are in that village. So there is a gufa called Vyasa Gufa, and the rock on top of it is shaped very much like the books. So if you zoom in on that picture, you can see it's actually called Vyasa Pothi on that rock, and it does look like pieces of parchment piled on top of each other. Which, is it a coincidence or is it reality? And there is another place called Ganesh Gufa, which is not exactly next to the Vyasa Gufa, but it is said that Ganeshji sat in that Gufa and Vedavyasji managed to dictate over a distance, and Ganeshji could scribe it down in that Gufa. So that's where it was actually written. And a further little bit away is the Saraswati River, and there is this massive rock which has been put across it like a bridge, and that was supposed to have been done by none other than Bhim, to allow the Pandavas to cross over and make their onward journey towards heaven at the end of their lives. And apparently there is a further trek further down the road, which unfortunately we could not undertake. But there are lots of historical sites in this place, which again point it to being fact rather than fiction. Next slide, please. So just coming back to the story, again, I'm sure you all know that it all starts with King Shantanu, who initially marries Ganga Devi, and he gets a child called Devavrat, who subsequently takes on the name of Bhishma. Shantanu then falls in love with Satyavati, and he has a child called Vichitravirya. Unfortunately, Vichitravirya cannot have any children and he dies. So Vedavyasa is called by Satyavati. Vedavyasa, in fact, is Satyavati's son with Rishi Parashara. And he then begets Dhritarashtra and Pandu, who are the two tribes, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. So in the Pandavas, as we know, Kunti Devi has three sons. So Dharmaraj from Yama, then from Vayu she gets Bhimasena, and from Indra she gets Arjuna. And then she also tells Madri the boon so that she can get two sons, the Ashwini Kumaras, Nakula and Sahadeva. Dhritarashtra in the meanwhile marries Gandhari, who comes from Gandhar in Afghanistan. And of course that is linked to her brother Shakuni. We get 100 sons, the Kauravas, and one daughter. So anyone know the name of the daughter?
Dushala.
Yeah, correct. And do you know whom she is married to? Anyone? I think she's married to
Jayadratha.
Jayadratha, yes, yeah. Okay, next slide, please. So the flashpoint of this whole story comes down to the game of dice. And of course, there is a lot of debate as to why Yudhishthira actually took part in this game of dice, because he is Yama, the Lord of Dharma himself. Why should he do such a adharmic activity? And then that leads to Draupadi Vastraharan, and Lord Krishna protects her. And ultimately it boils down to a fight between good and evil, dharma and adharma, which is all the Mahabharata is all about the fight between good and evil. Next slide, please. In terms of the lessons that we can learn, I mean, each of the characters, I think Sureshji is going to elaborate more. But just a few points that I take home is the blind love of Dhritarashtra for his son, how Karna stands with his friend Duryodhana in good times and bad. We learn from Raja Drupad how not to treat a friend and how that leads to Dronacharya vowing to fight on the side of the Kauravas. How Bhishma is steadfast in fulfilling a vow that he took to appease his father. The struggle and determination of Kunti to make sure her children get the best in life. From Abhimanyu, how half knowledge is dangerous. From Draupadi, how disrespecting women leads ultimately only to destruction. And most importantly, from Arjuna, who has all the skin in the world, but when he is without Lord Krishna, he cannot win. Next slide, please. So as we know, there is a lot of philosophy, as I mentioned, in the Mahabharata, and there are two really important pieces of work in the Mahabharata themselves, which have a lot of philosophy. So in Bhishma Parva, it is the Bhagavad Gita, and then Vishnu Sahasranam, which is in Anushasana Parva. So this is basically a whistle-stop tour of Mahabharata, and now I will hand over to Madhuji, who will tell us about the greatness of Mahabharata and Gita. Thank you. Krishna Arpanamastu.
So thank you, Sushit. So Devam Narayanam Natva Sarvadosha Vivarjitam Paripurnam Gurumshchan Gitartam Vakshami Leshataha. So this is the Mangalacharana Shloka of Acharya's Gita Bhashya. So I would encourage everyone to memorize this. Okay. So as Sushrit was saying, he's giving us a lot of historical background to Mahabharata. And he told us about, he even showed us some places where actually these Pandavas were roaming around. So he's shown that. He's also shown us a place where Vyasa was there and so on. So all incredibly interesting. But then it all boils down to the fact that why do we actually study the Mahabharata? We study the Mahabharata because, not just because it's a very interesting story with plots and subplots and subplots. You know, it can make the most interesting Bollywood movies, as you know, and the series that was done in India. But it is not just about the story and the storyline, because there is a lot of philosophy in that. Mahabharata is primarily a philosophical text. Yeah, so that we should never forget that it's primarily a philosophical text. And it is a Shastra Sara. It is a Shastra's essence of the Shastra or the philosophy is there in Mahabharata. And we all know that when Veda Vyasa himself did the third sutra, Shastra Yonitvat, he said, I can be known, Vishnu can be known, Krishna can be known only through the scriptures. And Krishna is the supreme hero of the Mahabharata. Okay, he is the supreme hero of the Mahabharata. So there is no doubt there that Mahabharata is a Shastra. Okay. In fact, in Vishnu Tattva Nirnaya, Acharya says, Sadagamaika Vigneyam Samatita Kshara Aksharam Narayanam Sada Vande Nirdosha Asesha Sadgunam. Sadagamaika Vigneyam, that this Narayana or Vishnu or Krishna can be known only through the Sadagamas. So what are the Sadagamas? It's always helpful for us to revise a little bit. So what are the Sadagamas? Brahmanda Purana gives a wonderful definition of what Sadagamas, what are Agamas. Sat Agama means, Sadagama means authentic scriptures. Rigadya Bharatam Chaiva Pancharatra Mata Akilam Moola Ramayanam Chaiva Puranam Cha Yetadatmakam Yeche Anuyayinas Tesham Sarvetecha Sadagamaha Duragamas Tadanyeye Tairnagneyo Janardanaha. So very clear. 7 primary scriptures. We have done it a lot of times in these forums. Hindus have 7 primary scriptures. Sometimes I hear folks saying that Hindus have no scriptures at all. You know, they are really basically fools. They don't know what they're talking about. There are 7 primary scriptures of Hindus. What are they? Rig, Sama, Yajur, and Atharva Veda. Bharata, Pancharatra, Agama, and Mula Ramayana. So these are the 7 basic scriptures of Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma. Okay. Then all the Puranas that concur with these 7 are also called Sadagamas. That includes Bhagavata Purana. And then anything else that concurs from the above, including our discussions today, also become Agamas as long as they talk about Paramatma or Vishnu. Okay. Duragamas tadanyeye tairnagneyo janardana. Any body of text that does not talk about Paramatma is a duragama, means it is not worthy in the ultimate sense. It might have some material benefits, but not in the ultimate sense. And we know currently we are doing Mundaka Upanishad, right? It also gives a little bit more, isn't it? Dve vidye veditavye itihasmayat brahmavido vadanti Paracha eva aparacha tatra apara rigvedo yajurvedaha samavedo atharvavedaha siksha kalpo vyakaranam niruktam chando jyotishamiti atapara yaya tad aksharam adigamyate. And we are doing this, we have been doing this for the past 1 month, and we are stuck on these 2 lines. In fact, we are currently stuck on the last line in our Atharvana Upanishad Chintanam. So we need to understand what the scriptures are, and Bharatam is right there. It is the 5th in this count. Remember that Rik, Sama, Yajur, Atharva. The 5th in the line is Bharata. Okay. Vishnoho sarvottamattvameha mahatatparyam sarvagamanam. And what does this Bharata does? It talks only about Vishnu everywhere because Krishna is the hero of Mahabharata. Okay, so from a series list perspective, we know that Bharatam is the 5th in that order. So not surprisingly, Skanda Purana says Bharatam chapi krutavan panchamam vedam uttamam dashavara artham sarvatra kevalam Vishnu bodhakam. Okay, this is Skanda Purana that talks about saying that Bharata is called 5th Veda, panchamam vedam uttamam. And it also tells us, Skanda Purana tells us, Dasha Vara Artham. Dasha means 10, Vara means high, Artham means meaning. Okay, it has got at least 10 meanings. Bharata has got at least 10 meanings. 10 correct meanings, not 10 wrong meanings. Not just 1 correct meaning and 9 wrong meanings. No, it has at least 10 correct meanings, and depending on the yogyata of the seeker, you can understand it at various depths. Okay, so Mahabharata is the 5th Veda. If there is one take-home message for us today, is that it is a Veda in its own right. It is the highest philosophy. Why do we say that? The same Skanda Purana goes and describes a situation. It describes an incident where there was a discussion, which is bigger, Vedas or the Mahabharata? So there was actually, the Purana says that there was actually an experiment that was carried out in a weighing scale where all the Vedas and all the Devatas, they all sat at one end, and Mahabharata was put on the other end, and the weighing scale tilted towards the Mahabharata. Because this Mahabharata has got so much of philosophy and depth of philosophy in it. Okay? And that is why, as Sushrut mentioned, it is called Mahabharata not because there was a big Mahabharata war. No, Mahabharata has got an etymology. Mahatvat Bharavatvacha Mahabharata Muchyate. Yeah, so Acharya gives an etymology as to why it is called Mahabharata. It is not because there was a war. No, it is because Mahatvat Bharavatvacha. Bhara means heavy. Heavy with what? Not heavy with letters, heavy with philosophy. It is so heavy with philosophy and Shastra that it is called Mahabharata. Okay, so here are some basic info about Mahabharata. Okay, so we should never forget this. So Mahabharata, as Sushrut was mentioning, was composed by Veda Vyasa. The original Mahabharata, this situation is very similar to Vedas, right? Vedas are Ananta Vai Vedaha, and only we got a few left. But similarly, the original Mahabharata has got 60 lakh granthas. So here is a quick question. What does a grantha mean? What is a grantha? Anybody wants to take that? What does grantha actually means in our Shastras? So grantha means a sentence with 32 syllables is called a grantha. Okay. So here you have Mahabharata. The original Mahabharata actually has got 60 lakhs granthas. 50% was given to Narada, okay, to teach all the Devatas. So that is like 30 lakh granthas are outside our purview. 50% Narada, Vyasa gives it to Narada to teach the Devatas all around the universe. Okay. Then 20% of the Mahabharata was given to Asita and Devala to teach Pitru Devatas. So that is about 15 lakh granthas. Okay. Then another fraction, 23.33%, that is 14 lakh granthas, was given to Sukacharya to teach the Gandharvas. Okay. And only about 1%, 1.67% of the Mahabharata, Veda Vyasa gives to Vaishampayana to teach Janame Jayaraja. So, what we have in this mortal world, says the Shastras, what we have in this Bhuloka, Mrityuloka, is 100,000 verses, 1 lakh granthas. Okay. So, we should never forget the original Mahabharata. And what we have here on Mrityuloka is 100,000, 1 lakh granthas. Okay, so that is a bit of a statistics there, but there is a lot of stuff going on here. But also, our acharyas tell us that down the thousands of years, there have been interpolation, there have been deletions, there have been additions, and there have been alterations over several thousands of years of this Mahabharata. Mahabharata, like Vedas, they did not come down with a notebook. They came down from a guru to a shishya through Shruti, and people memorized this down the generation. But somehow some alterations have happened over the last 1,000 years. So again, the reason why I am telling you that is, it's very important that we understand and study the Mahabharata with proper bhashyas and authentic bhashyas. Otherwise, we can be very easily misguided. That is very, very, very clear. And we will see as we go along the Gita, how that kind of fits in this argument about careful studying of the scriptures. Okay. So that is one bit of information. So 60 lakh granthas, and no wonder it is called Mahatvad Bharavatvacha Mahabharatam Uchyate. So why is Mahabharata called Jaya? So as Sushrut was reciting, right? Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet. So it says, the verse says, Veda Vyasa composed the Jayam. Okay. So why is Mahabharata called Jaya? Anybody wants to take it up? 2 minutes quiz. Why is Mahabharata called Jayam? Okay, so a bit of a dead silence here, no problem. So Mahabharata is
victory at the end. It's always victory at the end. The Dharma always Satyameva Jayate, they say, but it's something to do with alphabets also there.
Thank you, Pratibhaji. Anybody else wants to step in? Or I think Pratibhaji captured all the ideas there. So yeah, Jaya, some folks think that it's called Jayam because at the end, Dharma alone is victorious. So Jaya means victory. So that is why Mahabharata is called victory. Beautiful answer, Pratibhaji. But there is also another way of looking at why Mahabharata is called Jayam. So as you said, Sanskrit letters, I've listed here the Sanskrit letters. Okay, so the 8th letter is Ja, the first letter here is Ya. So Jaya, your Ankanam Vamato Gatihi. You should always read in reverse. So it becomes 18. So here is again the genius of Veda Vyasa. He gives the name Jaya to the scripture because it denotes the number 18. Okay, and number 18 is very popular in our forum, isn't it? Number 18 is Vishnu, we say. Who wants to give us a very brief idea of why is number 18 called Vishnu? Where do we get that evidence from? Who wants to tell us that?
Is this from Prashna Upanishad? You have been telling Shodasha Kala Purusha.
Beautiful, Shilaji. Thank you very
Jiva,
much.
17th Mahalakshmi, then 18 is Vishnu.
Beautiful. Thank you, Shilaji. Perfect. 100% correct answer. So, number 18 is very important in Shastra, as Shilaji was mentioning from Shatprashna Upanishad, where it talks about 15 fences, and the Jiva surrounds Jiva, the 16th entity, is surrounded by 15 fences. The 17th entity, Lakshmi, Sri Tattva, actually puts the Jivas in samsara with 15 fences, whereas it is the number 18 who is going to release the Jivas and give them liberation. So, number 18 is Paramatma, Bhagavan, Brahman, or Vishnu, whatever you want to call it, but Vishnu. So, as we said, the hero of Mahabharata is who? Krishna. Who is Krishna? Vishnu's avatara. So, Vishnu and Krishna, they are non-different from each other. So, That is what Mahabharata is all talking about. It is talking about this 18th number of Vedic philosophy, which is what Jayam is. Okay. So, Bharatam Sarva Shastrechu Bharate Gitikavara Vishnoho Sahasranamani Gneyam Patyam Cha Tadvayam Mahakurma Purana. So Kurma Purana says this Mahabharata is like the Himalayas. It is like a huge mountain. It's got so much verse, so much of scriptures, philosophy, text in it. It's like the Himalayan mountains. And if you take Mahabharata as the mountain, it's got two peaks, really tall peaks. The first one is called Gita. The second one is called Vishnu Sahasranama. And we know this quite a lot. Bhishma Parva and Anushasana Parva. Okay. Then you have the Mahabharata. So here is another important statement of Skanda Purana that is worth memorizing, and I put this for our benefit. Trayo artaha sarva vedeshu dashartaha sarva bharate Vishnoho sahasranamapi nirantara shatartakam. Vedas have at least 3 meanings. Gita and Mahabharata have at least 10 meanings. Vishnu Sahasranama has at least 100 meanings. Okay, so there are a lot of philosophy included in this. So again, sometimes when folks say my Gita Bhashya or my Gita interpretation is the most authentic, I just need to remind them about what our Puranas say about Gita. There are at least 10 authentic meanings, not just the one that somebody claims is the right meaning. Okay, so it is important to remember again, there are at least 10 meanings. Okay. Now, here is another beautiful verse from Mahakurma Purana, which actually talks about what is this Gita all about. So we have done Mahabharata. Let's make a gradual entry into Gita. Tatracha Sarva Bharatartha Sangraham Vasudeva Arjuna Samvada Rupam Bharata Parijata Madhubhutam Gitam Upanibandha. Upanibandha, says Kurma Purana. It says Gita is this conversation between Vasudeva and Arjuna Samvada Rupam. It is a dialogue, isn't it? And what is it? Bharata Parijata Madhubhutam. So if you think this Bharata is this Parijata flower that is very popular in India, like we use it for various pujas at home. Some of your parents will have Parijata tree at home. So the nectar of the Parijata flower. So Gita is the Parijata. If the Parijata flower is the Mahabharata, the nectar or the honey of the Parijata flower is the Gita, says the Kurma Purana. Okay, so here is a summary of what we are looking at. How do we compare and contrast Mahabharata and Gita? Okay, Mahabharata is the story of Krishna. Okay, Gita is the essence of Krishna's teaching. Mahabharata is Gita in action. Okay, Gita reveals the philosophy of Mahabharata. Vasishta Krishna wrote Mahabharata. Yadava Krishna taught Gita to Arjuna. Okay, so they complement each other. So Gita and Mahabharata, they complement with each other. And I hope these comparisons are useful and understand for our contemplation. Now, here is another view of Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so we all know that Bhagavad Gita, of course, as I've said, it is the essence of the Mahabharata. It is not only the essence of the Mahabharata, Gita is the essence of the Vedas and the Upanishads. And we know that because it is part of the Prasthana Trayas. And every time we do Upanishads, we always bring in a verse of the Gita and link it up with the Sutra and do our studies as a Prasthana Traya. Why? Because Gita is the essence of the Vedas and the Upanishad. And in fact, there is one Upanishad that we have already done. We spent about a year and a half doing it, called the Katha Upanishad. And there are so many verses in Katha Upanishad that are very similar to the verses in Gita. So there is a view there that Gita is a further exposition of Katha Upanishad. The philosophy of Katha and Gita are very similar. Okay? So that is another important idea that you need to have in mind. And here is a novel idea that some of you may not be aware, but the school of Ramanuja and the school of Madhva, they strongly believe that the philosophy of Pancharatra Agamas, yeah, so there used to be the Pancharatra Bhagavatas, even Krishna talks about this. So the Pancharatra Bhagavatas the theistic school. It's an ancient theistic school of Sanatana Dharma that glorified and worshipped Vishnu and Krishna. So this Gita is also considered as an essence of Pancharatra Agama. And of course, Gita in various places, Krishna himself says, Brahma Sutra is an important text to understand the Gita, and the Gita has to be understood only in the context of Brahma Sutras. So I hope you are able to understand how this Prasthana Traya gets into this equation. Okay, here is another beautiful, metaphor, and we are all very familiar with this figure, isn't it? We have the cow, we have the calf, then there is a Krishna with his flute. Okay, it is very metaphorical. Some folks take it literally. I would prefer to take it very metaphorically, because our Shastras gives an explanation of what is the reason behind this cow and the calf and the Krishna playing his flute. What is the philosophy behind this? Gauhu means Veda. Gau means Veda. Okay, so Upanishads. If this cow is the Upanishad, what does the calf do? Calf drinks the milk from the cow, right? What is the milk? Milk is the Gita. Who is the cowherd? Krishna is the cowherd. Krishna, the cowherd who milks the cow in the form of Gita, that this Arjuna, who is the calf, drinks it. It should not just be Arjuna, it should be all of us. Okay, so that is the metaphor. Next time when you see this kind of imagery, think about this, because the knowledge of the Gita should ultimately lead us to devotion. If it doesn't, then it is not worthwhile. Okay, it's a complete waste of time. The knowledge of the Gita should lead to devotion, which is described as a butter. And Krishna loves butter because Gita should lead us to devotion. Okay, Neetaji. Do you have a question?
Only if you finish this part of it, then I will.
Okay, fine. Yeah, almost there.
Oh,
So
no,
Krishna,
yeah.
the knowledge of the Gita should lead us to devotion. So this is the whole metaphor of this. I hope you find it interesting. Now here is another basic phenomenon. Gita summarizes the 9 tenets of Vedic philosophy over 18 chapters. 9 tenets over 18 chapters. 8 plus 1 is 9. And there are only 9 tenets of Vedic philosophy. What are those 9 tenets? Hari parataraha satyam jagat tatvato bedaha jivaganaha harer anucharaha nichocha bhavangataha muktihi naija sukha anubhutihi amala bhaktishta tatsadanam kakshadi tritayam pramanam akila amnayaika vedyo harihi, says Vyasatirtha and Prameya Navamalika. And Baladeva Vidyabhushana of the Chaitanya school writes a book in the 18th century called Prameya Ratnavali, which is exactly Prameya Navamalika, and he illustrates this further as well. So throughout the sessions of Gita, you will find that there are only 9 tenets of Vedic philosophy that is described in the Gita. Okay. Now, finally, I want to finish off with, there are scriptures, there are books out there that actually talk about the glories of Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so we can celebrate Bhagavad Gita in our own way, but actually Puranas, the Puranas actually describe a lot about the glories and greatness of Gita. Okay, Padma Purana is a classic example. In Padma Purana, there are chapters that deal with a conversation between Lakshmi and Vishnu. And there it is said, Gita is another form of Lord himself. Gita is the Lord in words. And in fact, Padma Purana says, the face is the first 5 chapters. The arms are the next 10 chapters. The belly is chapter 16. And the 2 feet are chapter 17 and 18. It gives a metaphorical celebration of the Gita there. And after describing this, the Padma Purana then goes to in chapter 171 to 188, you will note that Rudra, Shiva and Parvati are having a conversation very similar to Lakshmi and Vishnu, where Parvati is asking Shiva about the greatness of Bhagavad Gita. And what Shiva does is, he glorifies Bhagavad Gita to Parvati with 18 incidents. Okay? So I've given this book here, The Glories of Bhagavad Gita by Prabhanjanacharya, who has given us expert seminars in our forum, where every chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is followed by a story, not a story, an incident that describes the benefits of that particular chapter. And ultimately, over 18 chapters, our aim should be liberation through the Gita. So what I would suggest is, when we complete every chapter, we will also get one of us to read one story or one of the incidents that go with that particular chapter. Okay. This is my last slide. Now, as Suresh ji organizes the 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, we have taken some key lessons from the previous round of Bhagavad Gita. And what we have decided this time is we are going to have a very focused syllabus, as it were. We are going to only use a few books as reference text. Okay, and we are going to discuss the philosophy based on these books. So the books that we are going to take up includes Acharya's Gita Bhashya and Gita Tatparya Nirnaya and Raghavendra Tirtha's Gita Vivruti. Okay, so English books are available. So we have a beautiful book, an English transliteration, a PDF that is available online that talks about Gita. Then there is a book in archives, and we can share the PDF. Venkatesh ji, who is going to be leading on chapter 1, is currently actually editing this book for publication. It is from Subbarao in 1903 that talks about the Gita Vivruti in detail. And then we have the masterpieces over 6 volumes that talk about the whole Bhagavad Gita from chapter 1 to chapter 18, putting all these things together. So we got some prescribed text for our contemplation over the next several months. Okay, so please make a note of these reference texts. If some of you want to have a copy of this, we can happily send those. And of course, for the Gita recitation practice, which started today, it was a wonderful session over 25 minutes. We would recommend Bhagavad Gita as it is. This is for English transliteration only, because you have the Sanskrit verse and you have the English transliteration. For those of us who are not familiar with Sanskrit, I think these books are helpful. Bhagavad Gita as it is for English transliteration, or Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God by Mukundananda. So that's the overarching idea. I hope you found it interesting, and I'm going to pass it on to Suresh ji now.
Thanks, Madhu. So we'll come to the last part of today's session, which is about the general overall content of Gita. Sarvopanishado gavo dogda gopalanandanaha partho vatsa sudhir bhokta dugdham gitamritam mahat ekam shastram devaki putra gitam eko devo devaki putra eva eko mantrastasya namani yani karma ekam tasya devasya seva. Harihi Om Gurubhyo Namaha. Moving on to the next slide, Madhuji. So we just heard why is Mahabharata called Jaya and the relevance of 18. We did this when we did chapter 18 as well, but just to quickly revise, so Mahabharata is known as Jaya. We just talked about it. It's interesting that in chapter 1, Duryodhana names 11 Pandavas and 7 Kauravas. We'll touch upon this little later as well. And again, there 11 plus 7 becomes 18. If we look further about the relevance of 18, it's 18 Akshoyani armies which are fighting the war. There are 18 days of war. There are 18 Parvas in Mahabharata, 18 chapters in Bhagavad Gita, 18 verses of chapter 15. The last 2 are the summary conclusion of chapter 15. There are 18 verses in chapter 2 which describe the qualities of Sthita Prajna. And there are 18 verses of chapter 10 which describe the Vibhuti Rupa of Krishna. Now, some numerology again further into what is an Akshoyani. Well, it consists of 21,870 chariots and elephants. Then we have 65,610 horses and 1,09,350 foot soldiers. And the math is there. Just add them up and we get 18. There are 18 gunas which are represented by the characters, by the Pandavas. Yudhishthira with Dharma, Bhimasena, he describes 10 characters: Bhakti, Jnana, Vairagya, Prajna, Medha, Dhriti, Sthiti, Prana, and Bala. Arjuna, Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana. Nakula and Sahadeva, Sheila and Vinaya. Draupadi, Veda Vidya, and Krishna himself is Veda Vedya. And just one other interesting thing about 18 is Sanjaya actually names 18 Pandavas who sounded their conches in chapter 1. So you just see 18 being so common and so wonderfully conveyed by Veda Vyasa. And if we move to the next slide, we just talked about the Shodashakala Purusha, and that's where 18 comes from. Let's not forget Purusha Sukta, the Isha Upanishad that we have done. There are 574 verses spoken by Krishna. We'll come to the math a little in the next slide. And you add 5 plus 7 and 4, it becomes 16. And Arjuna asks 16 questions, and 16 represents Jiva. So there is a much deeper meaning into these, which I think we'll get into some of these details when we go into the respective shlokas and the adhyayas in the Gita Chinthana. On the next slide, now Gita as such is organized in 3 shatkas. Madhuji did just mention that Bhagavad Gita is the second of the 3 prasthana. The first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita are known as the Sadhana Adhyaya, where it describes about how should a sadhaka go about performing his or her tasks. Talks about karma, jnana, dhyana, and such other things. Chapters 7 to 12 is Sadhyadhyaya. Now, this describes the Supreme's qualities, his vibhuti, his vaibhava, his mahimas, in both spiritual and material dimensions. And the last shatka doesn't add a totally new concepts, but clarifies and summarizes some of these concepts. On the next slide, and there is structured evolution of thought. The first chapter and the first 10 shlokas of second chapter set the stage, and Krishna responds by describing the purpose of life, which then leads to the paths of duty in the third chapter. Now, to do the right, to understand duty and do the right things, one needs to have knowledge, which is what the fourth chapter talks about. And the right knowledge leads to renunciation of rewards, and that's the fifth chapter. And of course, it leads to self-restraint and dhyana. So that's the first 6 chapters, the first shatka of Bhagavad Gita. And then we get on to understanding the qualities of the Supreme. The Jnana Vijnana talks of ordinary knowledge and special knowledge, something we are dealing with our Upanishad lessons as well. There's journey of the souls, which is narrated in chapter 8. And then the eightfold dispensation and some additional, some other attributes of the Lord are described in chapter 9 in the Rajavidya Rajaguhya Yoga. The various manifestations then, and then the in Vibhuti, and of course the Vishwarupa Dharshana, the universal form of the Lord. And then the second shatka ends with the Bhakti Yoga. The last shatka starts with describing the theater of operations. What is Kshetra? Who is Kshetrajna? And we as Kshetrastas, and what's our roles? And then with the description of qualities of nature in the Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga of chapter 14, we come to chapter 15, which is then the quintessence of the Bhagavad Gita. If Bhagavad Gita is the nectar of the flower, Parijata, flower of Mahabharata, then perhaps chapter 15 becomes the nectar of Bhagavad Gita. And it's very interesting that chapter 15 has 700 letters. There are 15 verses which contain 32 letters, and there are 5 verses which contain 44 letters. Just hold on to the thought of 700. We'll touch upon that in the next slide. Then we have the types of human nature in the 16th chapter, and then that leads to what's the inherent nature and the interaction of inherent nature of human being to the natures of to the different types of qualities of nature, which is in the Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas gunas. And then, of course, the Gita comes to a conclusion with Krishna summarizing all of his teachings in the last, the Moksha Sannyasa Yoga. So just a very structured evolution of thought of Bhagavad Gita. On the next slide, Madhuji, which is conveyed through 700 verses. So there are totally 700 verses, and we just saw that in chapter 15, interestingly, it has got 700 letters. And this was more of interest just to depict this here. I've put some asterisks because when we go into details, we might find different versions. The first one is in chapter 1. While there is no Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, there is when the chariot of Arjuna is stationed between the two armies, Krishna actually tells Arjuna to have a look at his opponents. So that part could be attributed to Krishna in some interpretations. So I just put an asterisk there. And in the 13th chapter, the first shloka, which Arjuna says that there is again, some people do count it as within the original Bhagavad Gita text. Some people don't. If we include that, then it becomes 701 verses. If it's not included, there are 700 verses in Bhagavad Gita. That I thought was just important to keep in mind as we delve into going deeper into the different chapters. If we move to the next slide, Madhuji, so very quickly, and this demands a holistic approach. And the reason I put this slide here was just to make sure that as we go deeper into it, we ask the questions of why. So the question here is, as we just saw in a few slides earlier, there are 11 Pandavas that Duryodhana lists. The question is why these 11? The first 11 on the left side are the who are specifically mentioned by Duryodhana. And just some context, who is Satyaki, Yuyudhana? He is someone who always listened to Balrama, and perhaps Duryodhana's contention is that had Balrama been around, this guy should have been fighting with me and not against me. So for each of those characters there, I mean, when we take stock of the enemy, the people that we fear most are perhaps who come topmost in our mind, and those we feel, who actually should have been with us, guys. And look at this. Then they're actually fighting against us. Here is this Virata. His brother Kichika was killed by Bhima. Don't you think he should be fighting along with me? This is Drupada. Even he fought against Krishna. The Pandavas actually defeated him, and he had to give up half of his kingdom. Drishtaketu is son of Shishupala, who was killed by Krishna during the Rajasuya Yajna. Chekitana is again a brave heart, like Satyaki, and had Balrama been around, he should have been fighting with us. The king of Kashi, he is actually Bhima's father. Kashi had, I guess what I understood was that Vara and Nasi, today's Varanasi, were actually two different kingdoms. And what the king of one of them is the father-in-law of Bhima, and other is Duryodhana's father-in-law, and Duryodhana's father-in-law was killed by Krishna. Now, had he been alive, he would have fought with me. But look at this, Bhima's father-in-law is alive and he's fighting against me. And why are Purujit and Kunti Bhoja fighting against me? Just because Prithu was adopted by the king of Kunti, and that's the reason. So the idea here, and again with Shaibya, he is the king of Shibi. His son, while aiding Jayadratha in trying to kidnap Draupadi, was killed by Bhima. Would it not be logical that these guys should be fighting against the Pandavas? But look at it. They're actually fighting against us. So I thought it was relevant here just to touch upon this, that it's as Madhu keeps reminding us every time, that it's important to take the entire context into before we try to understand, and especially when we get into chapter 1, when there'll be a shloka aparyaptam tadasmakam balam bhishma virat. So when we get into some of that as to what's Duryodhana's mindset, some of these perhaps will help us place the right perspective and get a better understanding of what Krishna is trying to teach us. So that's the reason I had put up this slide. And coming towards the end on the next slide, just very briefly, I thought it would be interesting. Shushrutji has mentioned the rupas, the avatara rupas of Pandavas, and the rest of them are here more for reference. Parshurama, Vedavyasa, Narayana himself, Drona, Brahaspati, and he was the Taraha Kapi. He was a Kapi in Ramayana whose name was Taraha, and the Vidura is Yamadharma himself. Shishupala and Dantavakra we know are Jaya Vijaya. Sanjaya was the leader of Gandharvas, he was known as Tamburu. So there are all of these references available, and it will be good, and it will perhaps make it more interesting when we come across these characters, that we get into deeper to understand what's the relevance around these characters. So on the next slide, so that is what we wanted to convey today. This was just a reminder that if you have any suggestions, we had the recitation session earlier today. Please feel free to get in touch with suggestions or requests for anything that you may have. So with that, we come to end of today's session, but we can open it up for question answers at this point of time. And after that, I will request Venkatesh ji to just give us a brief overview about how chapter 1 would take place on the 29th of October. The last Sunday of every month is when we will have the Gita Chinthana. So with that, we will open it up. Any questions, any suggestions, any comments, anybody who wants to share thoughts, please feel free.
Wonderful, Suresh. Spot on. 1 hour. So there's like clockwork. This is very, very well done, all of us. 1 hour, we just finished it. So yes, we had 2 questions. I think Neeta ji had one question during my talk, and then Anand Kulkarni has also raised a hand. So Neeta, do you want to go first, and then Anand next, please?
So I wanted to say that picture of yours, if you put that up, the cow and the milk and the Krishna one. And what I was going to say is that links with the shloka. Actually, Suresh ji has actually mentioned it in his presentation, the first shloka and Suresh's first slide. So I just wanted to link those two together for everyone to remember. That's Sarvopanishado Gavaha Dugdha Gopalanandana Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitam Mritam Mahat. So that links with this picture.
Beautiful.
So,
thank you very much.
I wanted to say, yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. Anand.
Yeah, thanks, Neetaji. That was really beautiful. Very well compared to the shloka and the picture. Thank you very much. Madhuji, I have a question and a comment. The Vedas, we call them Shrutis, and they're Apaurushaya. I thought you did mention that Mahabharata is also a Shruti, not Smriti. It is not Apaurushaya, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right. So Vedas are Apaurushaya, so they are a different breed in themselves. So Mahabharata is a Paurushaya Grantha, but who is the composer of the Paurushaya Grantha? The composer of the Paurushaya Grantha is Vedavyasa himself, who is celebrated in Mundaka Upanishad itself, which is going to come next. Yeah, yes, Sarvajnaha Sarvavit. So the Upanishad, the Apaurushaya Grantha itself confirms that Vedavyasa, Krishna, Vishnu is Sarvajna. Sarvajna has composed Mahabharata and also Brahma Sutra. So one view there, Anand, is that the Prasthana Trayas, if you take, there are 3 Prasthana Trayas, right? Sutra Prasthana, Gita Prasthana, and Upanishad Prasthana. Those are the 3 Prasthanas. The Upanishad Prasthana is Apaurushaya Grantha. And then among the 3 schools of Vedanta, there are slight differences of opinion as to which comes first, second, and the third rank. So that's for the pure academics to debate and think about it. But what, at least in Tattvavada, what we do is we take Brahma Sutra number 1, Gita Prasthana is number 2, and Upanishad Prasthana is number 3, because Upanishads, the Vedas are Apaurushaya, but they are actually under the control of the Paramatma. Yeah, they are under his Niyamakatva. They are under his control. So in that higher, deeper philosophical sense, whatever Vedavyasa has composed actually takes a higher precedence, and that's why in Tattvavada, Gita and Sutra and Gita take number 1 and number 2 ranks in the Prasthana Traya. So you're right, Mahabharata is not Apaurushaya, but it is Paurushaya, but it is so vast, and its philosophical structure is, in fact, there are bhashyas that talk about what philosophy is there in the Vedas is there in the Mahabharata. but what philosophical points are discussed in Mahabharata is not available in the Veda. So it is that level of importance is given to Mahabharata because Sarvajna Veda Vyasa has composed it. So we consider that as Panchamo Vedaha. So not as Apaurushaya, but as Paurushaya.
Thanks, Madhuji. And just a quick comment about when you said the Vedas have 3 meanings and Mahabharata Gita has 10 and Vishnu Sahasranama has 100 meanings. You rightly said that they are the correct meanings, not to be perceived as the 3 schools of Vedanta or the 3 different interpretations by different acharyas. So thank you very much for making it clear. And I thought that should be stressed upon. That's why I made this comment.
Thank you, Anand. Wonderful.
Any more questions? If not, we'll request Venkatesh ji to just brief us about chapter 1 and we'll come to the close of today's session.
Namaskaras to everyone. Namaskaras to all of the people who are gathered here. All I can tell you is congratulations on setting up, on rediscovering and discovering Gita again and again. Every single time we go and discover Gita, it makes my hair stand on the edge. Just because what is really neat about the Gita is it takes a very intellectual and spiritual discussion and then converts it into emotions and actions that we can actually do. And so one of the first things that we keep asking ourselves all the time is, the Gita is there, but what is in it for me? What can I do from the Gita? That God has given to what we think is an Uttamadhikari. Arjuna being an Uttamadhikari. So it's not like Arjuna didn't know a lot of stuff. He had a momentary lapse in his judgment that Krishna is repairing right away. And so when an instruction is given to such a smart pupil, it kind of behooves all of us to sit down, sit up, take notice, listen. So the Bhagavad Gita kind of goes through that process, but the main idea of the Bhagavad Gita has always been yato dharmaha tato jayaha. Where dharma is, there is the jaya. Which is the reason why also, like to carry on from what Suresh ji and Madhuji have been saying, jaya is dharma. Dharma Raja, that's why he has that Ananta Vijaya as his Shankha. Infinite victory. The victory that shall not be hollow, because of him being a Dharma Raja has a Dharma Ananta Vijaya as his Shankha, which he then boldly goes out and says. So I think what we want to do is Bhagavad Gita, like people have been saying, and like Madhuji and Suresh ji and Shishra ji has also said, is that it has a massive condensation and simplification, because it is taking all the Vedas, all the Upanishads, all the Brahma Sutras, the Shiksha, Vyakarna, Nirukti, Jyotish, Chandas, and Kalpa, the Mahabharata, all the Narayana Ashtakshara Kalpa and things like that, and then all the Bhagavata Puranas. But it is able to summarize it without losing any accuracy. And that is really at the genius of Bhagavan Veda Vyasa, I think. And so what we hope to do with the chapter first is to kind of like convey that message of the Bhagavad Gita, what is in it for me, and then to kind of like set ourselves up on a very, very firm foot to go through the chapters 2, 3, 4, and all the way up to 18. And so I want to welcome all of you to be able to do this. And what we are going to be doing is setting up a foundation where we are saying, Krishna wants us to do our Swadharma. Krishna wants us to do Nishkama Karma. Krishna wants us to do Bhakti Yukta Upasana, devoted service. And then Krishna also wants to understand Swatantra Tyaga, how we can give up our ego and the Swatantra Brahma so that Krishna can then guide us. And so Bhagavad Gita can be tough. But what I want to be able to say is, Acharya himself says in the Upodghata in Brahmasutra, in Bhagavad Gita Bhashya, he says, Brahma pitanna janati ishat sarvopi janati. He says, Brahma, Brihaspati, also called Brahma, he doesn't know all of Mahabharata because of those 10 intersected meanings which become infinite when you're pulling it out. Ishat sarvopi janati, he says. A little bit of Mahabharata, everyone can understand. And that is a really, really great thing that the Bhagavan Veda Vyasa has written it in such a way that while it is impossible for us all to get everything, all of us can get something. And I look forward to getting something so that we can all apply ourselves. And so over a period of time, I will consult with Sureshji and find out what is the exact mechanism of how to do it. I have to be quite frankly, I don't know what is the exact mechanism, but I'll learn from him, and then we'll set up a schedule, and I welcome people to come in and give their opinions as well. And then we'll let you know what might be the appropriate way to proceed. So having said that, I want to give namaskaras to all of the elders here and wish all of you a very, very great entry into the Bhagavad Gita. Namaste.
Thank you, Venkatesh. So we'll look forward. It'll be an interesting discussion. As we said, it'll be the 29th October, the last Sunday of next month is when we will do the chapter 1. So with that, we come to the end of the first session of the second iteration of Bhagavad Gita on the Sahiti Forum. Madhuji, back to you.
Yeah, so thanks Suresh and Venkateshji for that. So one thing I want to remind all our friends is that please let's make the most use of these sessions, and the best way of making use of this session is do our own homework. So please let's all spend the next 4 weeks, read about chapter 1, get some background so that we have something and we also learn something and we contribute. So both Swadhyaya and Pravachana, as you know, is very important as per Taittiriya Upanishad. So let's follow that principle. So please do some background reading before you come on the 29th. So I want to thank you all for joining. So next Sunday, there is a little bit of traveling going on. So next Sunday, there is no Upanishad class. There may be Gita recitation next week. So we will confirm that. I will catch up with the Yaya Tad Aksharam Adhigamyate the following week. Okay. So that's the plan for the next couple of weeks. So we close today's session with Suresh taking us through Omkara, please. Thank you, everyone. Hare Krishna. Take care. Stay safe. See you in a fortnight's time.
Hare
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.